Julieta.
Okay, so we're gonna get started. Tell me when, Julieta.
Yo estoy lista, Yoshiko-san.
I'm ready. Yoshiko-san, are you ready?
Yeah.
Let's start then.
Okay.
Great. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're live.
Hola, muy buenas
Hi,
tardes y
good afternoon.
acompañarnos.
Thank you and welcome everyone for joining us for our keynote address live, Imperfect Past, Feminism and Art in the Japanese Post-War Period. Today we are honored and privileged to be joined by Dr. Yoshiko Shimada, who is a renowned art historian, as well as one of the most prominent feminist and anti-war visual artists in Japan today.
Antes de empezar, me gustaría
Before
leer
starting,
la
however,
trayectoria.
I'll read you her trajectory. Dr. Shimada is a doctor from the University of Kingston, London. As a visual artist, she explored the themes of cultural memory and the role of women in the Asia-Pacific War, both as aggressors and as victims, through recording, video, performance, research, and archiving for their expression. As an art historian, as an archivist, her research interests include art and politics,
Educación artística alternativa y el feminismo.
arts,
Su
education.
arte se exhibió recientemente en la Triennale de Aichi en 2000.
Recently exhibited at Aichi Triennale 2019, Beyond Hiroshima at the Tel Aviv University Art Gallery in 2015, and among her numerous publications, I mention only the most recent. The chapter of the book Conceptualism and Materiality entitled Matsuruwa Yutaka and Spirituality in Suwa, as well as the chapter Undercurrents in Art and Policy in Japan, Jendashiko Bigoka, to be published in the Book of the Red Years, Theory, Politics, and Aesthetics in the Japanese 68, to be published in the fall of this year. She has lectured in the universities within the outside of Japan, including Tokyo University, where she currently lectures on feminism.
He tenido la oportunidad de asistir a algunos de sus talleres.
Opportunity to attend some of her workshops and seminars at Kyoto Seika University, and I am deeply pleased that thanks to Satori and the magic of technology, we can listen to her in Spanish today with simultaneous interpretation. So, Doctor, welcome to the virtual Satori space. We are delighted to be joined by you today. We really thank you for your presence very much. And without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Julieta. Thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. Today I'll talk about the history of feminism in Japan in relation to my own artwork and some other artists as well. So I have prepared see my Yes. I should be able to get this in. So here we go. Okay, can you see this? Okay. Oh, can I just ask you if this looks okay? Hello?
It does. It looks great.
Okay. So, okay, great. Yeah. So, first, let me introduce myself a little bit more. I was born in Tachikawa. It's a western suburb of Tokyo. And Tachikawa has always been a military town with an airfield. First, it was used by us. It was a civilian airfield first. Then it was used by the Japanese army during the wartime, and then by the U.S. occupation army between 1945 and 1967. And now it's used by Japanese Defense Force. So I grew up in the atmosphere of U.S. military presence and the sex trade and anti-war movement, etc. And after I graduating from public high school in Tokyo, I went to America and studied at Scripps College in Claremont between 1926 and 1989. But the large part of that was about the Second World War. So after seeing so many images of the war, I started to research the Japanese women's roles during the wartime. In the post-war Japan, as I was growing up, we are told women and children are always victims of the war, or the women, especially mothers, are for peace. However, the leading Japanese feminists, including Hiratsuka Raicho Hiratsuka, who started women's position in the society, and the Great Japan Women's Defense Association, a national organization in support of the war effort, was formed, and they had the white apron, a symbol of Japanese female, the symbol of motherly love, as a uniform. And in one particular photograph taken in then colonized Korea, a group of Japanese female colonizers clad in white aprons were learning how to shoot the Korean rebels in order to defend their properties. Check the position of the motherly care and pistol, and the fact that the Japanese women are not all victims, but perpetrators of colonial rule, made me examine my positionality in Asia. So this is the etching. I studied mostly printmaking at Scripps College, and on my return, I continued practicing the printmaking. So this is the etching I made in 1992, I think, based on the photograph. And also this one is, as I said, this is the white apron as the symbol of motherly love on the left, and then as a colonizer, still wearing the white apron. And on the right-hand side, this is Japan's Women's Defense Organization, all women wearing white apron as uniform. But then after the war, after the defeat in 1945, Japan was democratized by Allied force. The post-war Japanese constitution included Article 24, the Gender Equality Clause. And in 1946, the universal suffrage was established. With the liberation, the pre-war feminists came back to the central stage. Again, this on the left-hand side, Ichika Osae. She was momentarily purged from public office, but then after a short period, she returned to the politics soon. And then Hiratsuka Raicho on the right-hand side, she's in the middle. She took initiative of Mothers for Peace movement without ever mentioning her collaboration with the military during the wartime. The post-war liberation women had two fundamental misgivings. For one, it was not won by their struggle against authority, but was given by the foreign power, namely American. For the second, the feminists who collaborated with authorities during the wartime never acknowledged their responsibility. Although it was said that the stockings and women in Japan became stronger in the post-war, their positions in the society did not change that much. They are still confined in the role of wives and mothers. It started to change in 1960s. So in Nichibei Anzen Hosho Joyaku, the Japan-US Security Treaty, commonly referred as ANPO, was signed in 1951. The ANPO Treaty committed the United States to help defend Japan if the country came under attack, and provided bases and ports for US armed force in Japan. So my hometown, Tachikawa, their Japanese airfield was made into American Air Force base. And still, there are lots of bases in Okinawa, but used to be American bases all over Japan. So with the renewal of this treaty coming up in 1960, one of the largest mass protests in the post-war Japan was organized. But let's see these millions of people surrounding the Diet building in this picture. But despite the nationwide protest, the bill was passed through the Diet lower house on May 19, 1960. This ignited anger among ordinary citizens, and more people joined the demonstration. Armed with clubs and water cannon, the police counterattacked the demonstrators, and in the mayhem of June 15, 1960, Kamba Michiko, a female student of Tokyo University, was killed by the police. Then after AMPO, mass movement momentarily subsided, but as in the US and in Europe, anti-war movement and the student movement became active in the late 1960s. There are many female student participants. Although, as you can see in these pictures, those most front ones, the leadership was taken by male. And well-known feminist scholar, Ueno Chizuko, she herself participated in student movement, often mentioned making rice balls, onigiri, behind the barricades during the student movement. And now it is accepted as a fact that the opposition against this male-dominant radicalism was driving force of women's liberation movement in 1970s. But I don't think it was that simple. In fact, there are many female students, especially at all women's universities, who took leading roles, as well as many male students cooked and supported other students who were arrested. This too much emphasis on the rice bowl story tend to lead to the separation of the new left radicalism and women's lib movement. But in fact, I don't think it was the story was not that simple. Because among the female student, especially, for example, this Chieko Kashiwazaki, her nickname was Gebarto Rosa, after Rosa Luxemburg. She was born in 1943, and she was a graduate student of international politics at the Tokyo University at that time. And also she was married. So she was a mature student, and she was a member of the Student Front for Liberation, or SFL, which was part of the Maoist Marxist-Leninist League. And she was one of the striking students who barricaded buildings at Tokyo University Komaba campus. And she was also active in women's movement as well. Seen here in this book, on the left-hand side with Kamba Michiko's mother, the female Tokyo University student who got killed in 1960. And on the top, in the demonstration on International Women's Day. So this, in 1970, after this, or around the same time of the student movement, they appeared that the women's liberation movement. In Japanese, it's called Woman Lib. So Woman Lib movement was, as I said, it was not simply born out of the female students' dissatisfaction and resentment against the male-dominant student movement. Rather, it was strongly influenced by the New Left movement, which emphasized breaking away from the existing social and political framework. The women in the late 1960s were inspired to liberate themselves from the traditional family system, social norms that defined them. It is true that the New Left movement reflected the gender inequality in the Japanese society, and the revolutionaries often kept the traditional view of the gender laws. Nevertheless, the New Left and the Women's Lib had the shared philosophy, and it is too simplistic to consider them as separate or opposing movements. Tanaka Mitsu here, she is one of the leading figure of the woman lib movement. She wrote essay titled Liberation of Eros, Eros Kaiho Sengen in 1970. In this pamphlet, Tanaka called for a break from the previous reformist women's movement that aimed for equal economic rights within the conventional social system. She wrote, quote, "Thus, as for our liberation as women, it must be a liberation of eros, which means a reform or stream of consciousness that denies our sex. And we direct our movement towards the dismantling of the ie family system. By questioning men and authority, we will deconstruct our own fantasies of love, husband and wife, man, chastity, children, the home, maternity love, etc. By designing our own autonomy, we should like to aid reforming men's autonomy." Unquote. So the most urgent issue woman lib dealt with was that of body and sex. With the slogan, "The personal is political," they started to talk about the private issues such as sex, love life, reproductive rights, etc. Booklets and magazines, the one small zine was titled Woman Eros, Onna Eros, on female body was self-published and read in consciousness-raising meetings. They also organized women's only camps and retreats. There were women's communes where children were cared and raised collectively. For example, there was a Shinjuku Live Center in Tokyo and Tokyo Commune. Commune is like a palm of the commune, and koum, childbirth in Japanese. Sorry. But then there's kind of harsh reaction against this woman lib. Because a woman trying to take control of her body was a threat to those who adhered to the traditional Japanese family value. So therefore, it was expected that the woman lib would receive abhorrence and ridicule from most men and male-dominant mass media. However, most women, especially more traditional women's movement activists, also gave woman lib the cold shoulder. They thought woman lib's approach was too radical, too personal, and too much about sex. So later, Tanaka Mitsu, I think around 75, she left Japan. She went to Mexico and then studied body massage and cure, etc., and came back much later in Japan in 80s. But then there's another even more radical faction of feminism in the 1970s, which is Chupiren. Chupiren in Japanese, it's quite long. 中絶禁止法に反対し、ピル解禁を要求する女性解放連合。That is Women's Union against the eugenic protection law and 4, legalization of the birth control pills, which was started in 1975 by Enoki Misako. Enoki was a graduate of Kyoto University Faculty of Pharmaceutical Science, and she was 29 at that time when she started Chupiren. So they advocated for legalization of birth control pills. That was their main point. But then they started this movement in 1972, and the pill was finally legalized in Japan in 1999. So it took over 40 years since their advocacy. So Chupiren said the freedom to choose whether to have children is basic right for women. And for women to protect their right not to have children, the pill is the only method of contraction that they can control themselves. And also they formed a subgroup called Committee to Keep Women from Crying Themselves to Sleep. So, and that's a group that demanded the compensation and alimony from the husband and boyfriend who abandoned them or the perpetrator of domestic violence. Sometimes they would raid their workplaces of those husbands and demanded face-to-face negotiation. It was their intention to be messy, emotional, and sensational. The media loved the chaos Chupiren caused in workplaces with pink helmeted women screaming babies and bewildered dark-suited businessmen, like in this photograph. Yeah, they wore a pink helmet and then had the pink banners, and they stormed into their workplace, and they quite often took their babies, and they occupied the workplaces for hours, and they could, well, maybe now they will call the company will call the police, but then at that time they didn't, especially the Chupiren, they are quite media savvy, so they already have contacted the media. So the TV and the newspaper cameraman are there already. So the company really couldn't do the much violence against them. So when they started this in 72, 73, the Chupiren was a kind of media darling, and they're just all over television and the newspaper. However, the media ridiculed their chaotic, or they called female approaches, and the proper women's rights and even woman lib activists accused them of making a fool of the whole women's movement. Looking back now, Chupiren's refusal to conform to existing rules and the framework is very refreshing. Also, they engaged in the social issues with direct action that had mass appeal. Unlike Women's Lib, because Women's Lib increasingly distance themselves from mass media and then consequently from mainstream society. They became almost kind of separationist or remained in small group among themselves. In 1977, they formed the political party, Joseito Women's Party, with policies of establishing all-female government and all-female full-time public officials. The member ran for the National Diet election, but it was disastrous failure. Shortly after, Joseito and Chupiren were disbanded, and Enoki Misako disappeared from the limelight. Her whereabouts is unknown. Which is sad because, I think Chupiren and Enoki Misako, although they are sensationalists, I think that what they are advocating was very important. But unlike Tanaka Mitsu, who had been bit disappeared from the limelight, but then after she came back, recently there's a film made for Tanaka Mitsu, and also other activists from the late 60s, like the Tokyo University student leader Yamamoto Yoshitaka, who is now has written several books and lectures, etc. But Enoki Misako just totally disappeared. Um, and then hardly anyone, recently know about Chupiren. Only very few scholars, the feminist scholars, started doing some research. But I think until recently, Chupiren was even like not mentioned in feminist history. So anyway, in this picture, so I this is take photograph performance I did in last year. No, 2 years ago. No, last year. Last year, um, on March 8th, in commemoration on the International Women's Day, in commemoration of Chupiren and Enoki Misako. Okay, so what happened after that? After women lived, it's 1975. It was a United Nations International Year of Women, uh, and it was sort of turning point of the women's movement in Japan as well. So this conference was held in Mexico City in 1975, and that's where the Decade of Women was declared. And in response, International Women's Year Liaison Group was formed in Japan. It consisted of 41 existing women's groups, but most of which are the older reformist feminist groups that existed from the pre-war period. So that group worked with authority to advance gender equality. So in 1955, Equal Employment Opportunity Law was enacted, abolishing discriminatory regulations against women, such as early retirement age, choice of separate career paths, etc. But at the same time, it abolished the protective measures like prohibition of late night work and menstrual leave, etc. So since 75, there was movement to have more equal opportunity, and then also there are some women's centers built in most regions, and the women study classes started in universities. So these are positive move, but then and then it's in 1999, this gender equality law was enacted. But then this is gender equality law, it says in English, but then actual Japanese, the name of this law is 男女共同参画社会基本法. The literal translation is basic law for men and women co-participation in the society. So there's no mention of gender or equality in the original Japanese the name. But then this is gender equality law is the official translation of this law. And both equal employment opportunity law and gender equality law are basically to mobilize women in workforce to maintain the economic system in the future of aging society in Japan. So this was to mobilize women, and it looks, like emphasize on equal gender, etc. But then eliminating sexism and discrimination was not the main point. and especially it's these laws are non-binding. So gender equality is their target, but then it was if there was no equal payment or no affirmative action or no punishment for the companies that doesn't go along with these laws. So feminist scholar Takenobu in 2004 said the law was a typical neoliberalism policy in which women's labor was exploited while maintaining the existing power structure. And then in 1990s, there's a new issue came out. That was the comfort woman. In 1991, Kim Huxon came out to testify her past as a military sex slave, so-called comfort woman. The Japanese feminist organizations started to support the comfort woman by inviting them to testify in Japan. But their stance was largely taking it as a wartime sex crime against women. Apart from a few feminists, such as Suzuki Yuko, they largely overlooked the colonial history and Japanese feminist collaboration with the military regime during the wartime. Ueno Chizuko wrote that feminism could overcome nationality. And well, but then it's easy for Japanese to say it, or overcome or forget about the past. But the colonial past and forming international solidarity based on the sisterhood and victimhood. But forgetting the colonial past and then forming the international solidarity is it's just kind of one-sided. It's not that easy to erase the different positionalities among the women. So I started making some artworks about comfort woman in 1992. And this is a performance I made in 94. Sorry, it's a bit dark. It's titled Comfort Woman, Woman of Conformity, in which I clad in a white apron, reading wartime writings by some leading Japanese feminists in support of the military and the emperor. While on the screen, the eyes of Comfort Woman looked directly at the audience. And at the end, I produced a baby from underneath the white apron, squeeze it in front of Emperor's portrait. Blood comes out of the baby, and I make a red circle on the sheet of white cloth underneath, like a rising sun flag. And I raise the flag in front of the Emperor with my bloody hand. So meanwhile, in 2000, the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal on Japan's military sexual slavery was held in Tokyo. It was organized by Violence Against Women in War Network Japan, VAWNET Japan. They met on December 8th, 2000, and was adjourned on December 12th, 2000. So international feminist organization and the so-called comfort woman testified, not only from Korea, China, I think there was a Burma, Netherlands, Indonesia, etc. On December 4th, 2001, the group's final statement was issued in The Hague. The late Emperor Showa was found guilty because as a leader of the country, he was ultimately responsible for the sex slave policy. It was mock court and had no legal binding, but it influenced, it's ignited the huge response, including the backlash in Japan. So from 2000, the backlash against feminism started. So it started as the protest against the gender equality law, which was enacted in 1999. The conservatives started the media and political campaign in 2000, claiming that the law will destroy the family system, deny distinctive male and female characters, and destroy the Japanese traditional culture. They are particularly against the gender-free education and legalization of separate surnames for married couples, which is still the issue now. Their action coincide with the revisionist and rightist campaign against the comfort woman. They portrayed feminism as a kind of authority, or even like feminazis, that enforced political correctness upon school children and other ordinary citizens, depriving their rights to free expression, and then their traditional thought. Thus, they hijacked the liberals' language, such as freedom of expression, and pretended as if they were victims of feminists. And in 2000, a group of conservative scholars published a new history textbook, 新しい歴史教科書, which was intended to promote the revisionist view of Japan. The group particularly opposed the inclusion of comfort woman issue in any history textbook. And under Abe administration, which was 2006 to 7, and again 2012 to 2020, history textbook content was placed directly under the control of politicians. Abe publicly denied the existence of comfort woman, despite the Japanese government acknowledgement of involvement in Kono's statement in 1993. So, and then this revisionist movement was popularized by like Kobayashi Yoshinori, the well-known manga artist in this slide, and also Fusosha, the Fuji television company that published many books about this revisionist, not just revisionist view, but then those hate Korea, hate China books, and they become quite popular, unfortunately. And then there's this the issue of Statue of Peace, also called Comfort Woman statue. In 2011, the first Statue of Peace in memories of Comfort Woman was erected in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul, Korea. The Japanese government asked its removal. It was followed by a copy in Glendale, California in 2013, and in San Francisco and Manila in 2017. The statue in Manila was removed in 2018 upon the Japanese government's request. The latest copy was built in Mitte district in Berlin, which again, the Japanese government insists on their removal. It's for now that the statue in Mitte remains there, but it could be removed after the insistence of Japanese government. They not only campaign against the election of these statues, but any mention of statues or comfort women, they intervene in various exhibitions and conferences, not only in Japan, but also overseas. But then I started this another project titled Being a Statue of Japanese Comfort Woman in 2012. There's also amongst the comfort women, 10% of them were Japanese. Most of them are geishas and prostitutes before, and many of them knew they are to provide sex to soldiers. But most had no freedom to quit and come back to Japan. I think many of them died there, but those who managed to return home didn't reveal their past, as they would be shamed and discriminated. The existence of Japanese comfort women had been ignored by both revisionists and feminists. For revisionists, the image of Japanese woman is Yamato Nadeshiko, a virtuous mother of nation, or the Virgin, etc. While for the feminist and support organizations which emphasized on the victimhood of the comfort woman and also forced or many of the Korean victims are forced into system or their food. They are given that the false impression they're just getting that proper job, etc. So because of that, they the Japanese comfort woman who, including ex-prostitute, were kind of inconvenient victims. Raising their position was quite different from other victims in Asia. But I felt it was my duty as a Japanese feminist artist to remember Japanese comfort women. I think their existence should be known, and the Japanese government should recognize and apologize them. Because the way they were sent to the front line and couldn't quit or couldn't change anything themselves, I think they are also slaves, not just the prostitute. So that's why I started the guerrilla performance of being statue of Japanese comfort woman in 2012. I did first in front of the Japanese embassy in London. I painted myself bronze and then had kind of mocked the real, pretend as the statue. And then another one, this was in front of Yasukuni Shrine on the same year, and in front of Japanese Parliament. Then I had the chance of doing it in Glendale, California, organized by the Korean American Citizens Organization in LA in collaboration with Tomorrow Girls Troop, which I will talk a little bit later. So this was the Glendale statue. And then 2019, okay, this is May Day on that 2 years ago. I did the same performance in Seoul, Korea, in front of the Japanese embassy, again in collaboration with Tomorrow Girls Troop in Korea. This time I sat in the short distance from the statue because, as I said, there's a different positionality of Korean comfort woman and Japanese one. And I was a bit afraid that my presence might offend them. But in both cases, in Glendale and in Seoul, people are very supportive of my performance, and they understood the importance of bringing up the issue of Japanese comfort woman. But this against comfort woman issue, the Japanese government intervention continues. And this was 2 years ago, was big issue in Japan, the Aichi Triennale censorship. Aichi Triennale 2019 started on August 1st, 2019, and the mayor of Nagoya, Kawamura Takashi, expressed his opposition to the inclusion of the so-called comfort woman statue by Korean artist duo. The statue was placed in After Freedom of Expression, 表現の不自由展 exhibition. So this was a small exhibition within the triennial. So it's like exhibition within the exhibition. And the exhibition, this freedom after freedom of expression exhibition dealt with the past censorships in Japan. On August 2nd, in front of the press, Meyer Kawamura said, obviously this work trampled on the feelings of all the Japanese people. And this exhibited work shouldn't be supported with taxpayers' money. She suggested removal of the work or closure of the exhibition. This statement coming from the mayor seems to be a clear case of censorship. And after Freedom of Expression exhibition was closed after the Triennale's organizers reported multiple threats of violence against the festival. The organizers only cited safety concerns as a reason for shutting down that part of the exhibition. So that the freedom of expression part was closed. It was walled in after only 3 days of opening. And then the mayor also did sit-in with ultra-rightists in front of the Aichi Museum. And also at that time that the Japanese government spokesperson, current Prime Minister Suga, he suggested that the taxpayers' money shouldn't be used and suggested the cutting down the cultural fund for this kind of exhibition. And this is the work by Monica Meyer. Monica Meyer, hello? Oh.
I'm sorry, I had some technical difficulties, but I'm back.
Hi. Hi. Okay, so, well, this is Monica Meyer's work. The Monica Meyer, this was in the Aichi Triennial. Monica Meyer is a Mexican feminist artist, and she was a part of Aichi Triennale 2019. Not the freedom of expression part, but then the major part of that triennial exhibition. So this is her work, Clothesline, to which she invited the viewers to write their experiences of harassment. And I was invited to have a talk with her at the Nagoya University in June. And immediately after the Triennale committee closed down the After Freedom of Expression section, she emailed me saying that it was censorship, and she and her colleagues from South America were boycotting the Triennale. She was convinced that this was because of the comfort woman issue and felt angered by the fact that the Triennale committee had not addressed the core issue and only talked about security concerns. So we decided to make this issue visible by posing as a statue of the comfort woman statue. And we titled it Being a Statue of Non-Freedom of Expression. This is Monica Meyer, by the way. And then we asked people to send photos of them as a statue as well. We received so far nearly 200 photos from all over the world, many of the from feminist artists, scholars, and activists. So we posed at the one empty chair next to it, or in my case, at this time I was not in Japan. I was in Hong Kong. I had received a travel grant to be in Hong Kong from late July to the whole month of August. So I missed the whole Aichi Triennale thing. But then we responded via emails. So this is just the comfort woman statue built in Hong Kong. So I sat next to it. And these are some, several other artists from Korea, South America, quite a lot from South America because the Monica, we did this on the Facebook, and also from North America. So these photographs I made into slideshow, and that the freedom of after freedom of expression part was traveled later to Korea and last year in Taiwan, in Taipei Contemporary Art Museum. And these photos are shown there as well. So now the current situation in Japan. So there are other emerging young feminist artists in Japan in recent years. Tomorrow Girls Troupe, or Ashita Shoujotai, is a self-claimed fourth wave feminist art group. It modeled itself after Guerrilla Girls. So their organization is web-based and members are spread internationally. They aim to educate the young and change the gender inequality in Japan and other places. So there are members in South America as well. I think one of the members probably online now. And also Korea, some in China, in North America, and Europe as well. So they have very good websites. So I recommend you to go to see their homepage. And there's also Me Too movement in Japan. Me Too movement initially didn't have much impact in Japan, unlike Korea, where one rape murder case triggered a nationwide demonstration by feminists. But after the rape case of Shiori Ito Shiori-san here in the picture, she came out, it started to change the situation slowly. Especially after she was ridiculed and threatened in Japan and had to relocate to London. She's back in Japan now, but then after she became public about her case and then sued this perpetrator, there's huge number of blames and threats to her, not the perpetrator, because the perpetrator was a friend of ex-Prime Minister Abe. And also all the mass media sort of try to portray her as somebody that seeking for fame, etc. So she was physically threatened in Japan and had to leave Japan for a while. But her brave action encouraged more victims to come out. Now there are flower demonstrations once a month in Tokyo and various locations. The victims of sexual harassment on campuses and workplaces are more vocal now. There are more cases, especially in art world, like that this film company and also like art organization, that there's really horrible cases of power harassment and sexual harassment, and and that the victims finally came out and then sue the perpetrator. So the things are still very difficult, but then changing slowly. And then there's this, with this Olympic, I don't know if this is going to happen. It's probably, I hope it's not going to happen. But then there's this artist, Ichimura Misako. She has been working in Shibuya, Yoyogi area, where there's lots of gentrification going on before Olympic. Ichimura has been working for over a dozen years to empower people from the margins of Japanese society, the unsheltered urban poor, with a particular emphasis on improving the situation of women from this community. So she herself is homeless. I mean, she chose to live in the tent in Yoyogi Park. So with the upcoming Tokyo Olympic, Shibuya Ward signed a new agreement with Mitsui Fudosan Corporation, the major real estate developer, in 2015 to reinvent Miyashita Park in time for Olympics. So the park closed the park closed 2017, driving the homeless out of the park. And it was Shibuya bus stop where 64-year-old homeless woman was murdered by a 46-year-old man in the neighborhood in November 2020. This woman became homeless in February last year after losing her part-time job, which indicates she probably lost her job due to the corona pandemic, as a majority of part-time workers who lost their jobs since the pandemic were women. Some statistics say that 1 out of the 3 single women of working age, that is between 20 and 50, and 1 out of 2, that's 50% of single women over 60, are in poverty. The poverty means disposable income of less than 1,220,000 yen. That's about 12,000 US dollar a year. So it is also very difficult to rent a new apartment if you are a single elderly woman. And especially under this pandemic, they lose it, not just that the women are losing part-time job, but then when they have to stay in Japan and do lots of home education and housework themselves, and also there are lots of increasing cases of domestic violence and the young girls leaving home as a consequence, and those young girls have to seek for the sex work in Tokyo and also in big cities. So, and there's a sharp increase of suicide among women last year, staggering 80% of increase. So the situation is not great in Japan. So the Ichimura Misako has been doing demonstration about killing of women at home or homeless women in the street during the COVID-19. So currently Japan ranks at 121 in the World Gender Gap Report. While other Asian countries have improved their gender equality, Japan seems to be lagging behind. Through my research, through my talk, I come to 3 causes of this stagnation. One was that since the pre-war period, from the first wave feminists, they had mainly worked with authority to expand women's rights, but without really challenging the existence framework or existence images of the woman as good wife, wise mother stereotype. And for two, the more revolutionary woman lib movement and Chupiren, which emphasized on sexuality and body and questioned the existing social system, were ridiculed and dismissed even from the feminist history. So the radical change did not occur. And the third wave feminism um, retreated in 80s and 90s. They became very academic, and the feminism became distanced itself from the everyday reality of the young and less privileged woman. So, in order to change this situation, the conclusion, we need one, more direct political action against existing authority, not just collaborating with them and hoping, asking for change. We need to fight for the change and we need to win uh, the changes. And we also need to have solidarity with the underprivileged, silenced, and the marginalized woman. And also solidarity with other Asian feminists in Asia and also all over the world, but especially in Asia, because in Korea, Taiwan, and also underground, but then in China as well, there's a very strong feminist um, groups and movement. We need to learn from them. Okay, so that's all my lecture. Thank you very much. And if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shimada, for this conversation. I think I speak for everyone by saying that it has been an extremely interesting and enlightening conference, as well as extremely moving. And on my side, at least, I would like to say that I have always find your work, such as performance and comfort women, I have always found it to be extremely moving and very important, and definitely a way for, I'm sorry to say, very importantly, to continue presenting such important topics. Sorry for repeating important like 1,000 times. Anyway, now we will be asking a couple of questions. I would like to remind everyone who is listening, and if you have questions for Dr. Shimada, you can write it down as a comment either on YouTube or on Facebook. And we have received a couple of questions, so I would like to ask a couple of questions from 308 Art Tutorial, who says, Dear Sensei, thank you for your conversation. I'm Alejandra from Tokyo University, and I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, do you see a connection between the lack of gender equity in Japan as well as the birth rate that is so low in the country?
Okay, so just answer now or okay. Yeah. I think it's a very strong connection. I mean, with there's not much childcare, and also those husbands, Japanese husbands, still spend only like less than 30 minutes a day on helping household the work. So, and then with this equal opportunity law, etc., the women are supposed to, well, most of the women that household, the both men and woman, wife and husband work full time or part time, but then husbands don't do any housework, and there's no the shortage of childcare. So I mean, physically it's impossible, and also it costs so much because Japanese education costs a lot. If you have one child and then put the child from public school and then private university, uh, upon the graduation, you have needed like 10 million yen. That's quite a lot of money. So only those who, yeah, when I was teaching at the University of Tokyo, I realized that their parents are very wealthy. They used to be like, it's public school, so they used to be like poor, that the very smart kids from poor family could go, but now it's almost become impossible to send their kids to any university, private or public, if you don't have enough income. So yeah, it's very hard for a woman to even think of having children. So the birth rate is very low, and with this pandemic, I think it's even lower. So some say that the Japanese disappear in 30 years.
Thank you. I am now going to read the second question
Mhm.
from our tutorials 308. And she says, regarding the ultra-right organization, the Neto Oyoku, do you see them as a threat to gender equity in Japan?
Yes, they are unfortunately, compared to other countries, especially when I was talking to Korean feminists, the net or internet world in Korea, it's the feminists, and also before feminists, the democratization movement. They used uh, the internet news, etc., on there to advance their advocacy. But in Japan, from pretty much from the beginning, the internet was for otaku and netouyo. So it was still dominated by net right wingers. So and also that goes Twitters and then or other SNS. So during the Aichi Triennale, that my name appeared on the list of the Twitter. I don't do tweets, so I didn't get to read any of those horrible messages. But I mean, my representing galleries and then other people received the threatening emails, etc. And that for me was okay because no, they didn't do any physical well, did to gallery, but then the gallery people just dismissed and oh no, those netuyos are just uchibenke, they just like active on internet, but they never really come out and do anything. So they actually didn't come to visit the gallery or anything. But because of they have large numbers, they could mobilize the huge numbers, or maybe they are paid by someone, I don't know. But they also made phone calls and sent emails to this Aichi Triennial, and they closed down. They managed to close down the exhibition. And also recently, my friend of mine, who wrote um, article against the Harvard professor who wrote this horrible essay about comfort woman. So there's several of my friends, Japanese history people, wrote counter argument, and she has been receiving a lot of threatening emails and then Twitters. And they are also sending emails to the universities that employs those scholars. So, and then so far, the Japanese university hasn't done anything against those scholars, but then it's like real threat. And unfortunately, we still haven't really come up with it. Yeah, they said like, oh, that's freedom of expression. They're just, expressing their opinion. there seems to be no regulation or no control. And also that the feminist and presence is we still haven't had um, utilized the internet very effectively for feminist cause. So it's still, yeah, internet is still dominated by network.
This kind of leads me to a different topic from another question that came up in some of the comments we've received, that current feminist movements and about the new feminist Japanese generations, because very often it's the new generation, precisely those who have a bigger presence on the network. So I would like to ask you about this new younger generation. How involved are they? Are they kept on the benchmark? What do you think about them?
I think that it was, um, well, I know mostly that the artist groups, of the young ones, and they have been becoming more active. And especially this Tomorrow Girls Troop, as I mentioned, they have very good the homepage, and also they are very much net-based, and they are internationally like spread. So they are very good with media. But then also again, when they did the one campaign against this Moe is like this anime character with like very pretty girl with big boobs kind of things, and they used that the Moe character for the sightseeing campaign posters in an Ise Shima, so that the city government used this kind of image to promote the sightseeing, and that the TG Tomorrow Girls Troop did the campaign against it because they said it's not acceptable. Especially that was that the character's profile said, well, it's not real person, but then they still have profile and said, oh, it's like 15-year-old girl, and then wearing like really revealing clothes and stuff. So anyway, so they protested against, but then there's otaku, that the moe, the otaku did a huge campaign against TGT, and they even like found out now TGT members have this mask like guerrilla girls, because partially because this threat, because they identify some of the members, and they put their names and whereabout on internet. So that was like really real threat, especially that members are quite young. So even now, when they do some exhibition in Japan, they are very careful hiding their identity and also who would come. Yeah, now it's become not just for them. I mean, the artists who are doing any kind of the comfort woman issues, you have to be very careful. Who is coming to your exhibition. But I think now more younger groups are being more active. But still, when I was talking to my students, um, quite lots of them, they're interested in feminism and issues. But then for so many years, last 20, 30 years, they are kind of told at home that they're doing any kind of protest or direct action is wrong. It's just so they hardly go to demonstration. The students they was some years ago there was a demonstration against the nuclear power plant, etc. But still, a lot of young people don't go there, and I asked why, and they said, "Oh, no, if you go to demonstration, if your photograph was taken and known to authority, you will not get the job." In Japan, most students are kind of brainwashed that you have to have the job upon immediately upon graduation. So job seeking is the seems to be ultimate purpose for them. So doing anything like that, the political is kind of no for them.
I find it quite ironic that women who wish to speak about comfort women and feminism have to watch their backs, and while people who are doing online threats are simply expressing their freedom of expression, right? However, I also think that right there, there's a big issue with what you've mentioned before, that right now it's simply the wealthy families, those who can send their kids to universities in Japan, and that in general, you could say that, I mean, not always, I am speaking in very general terms, but people who live more comfortably, perhaps, they don't feel such a big need of really demonstrating, perhaps. So very often, fear of protecting this economic lifestyle they're used to is more important than going to a demonstration. So maybe that's a little bit why it's heading that direction. I would like to step back to the Sotaku and the Moe characters topic, because my research topic is actually related with pop culture, manga, anime, etc. And I basically live on a daily basis on this debate about whether it's a sexualization, objectification of women, or if women are the same ones who are involved of doing this sort of illustration, and therefore it's more of an empowering tool. And we actually have two questions related to that from Daniel Lechuga that says, Shimada Sensei, I think that Yokosho Ome anime plays a role in which Japanese girls are learning to defend themselves, and therefore they might eventually develop interest in feminism?
Mm, I'm not really into anime or current manga or the current ones, but so I cannot make any general statement. But I know there are some mangas. Like recently, I saw this um, manga about um, the 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 menstruation, and that was also made into film. That was really great. So there, I think one of the highest quality culture from Japan now is the manga. Um, but then the this kind of popular one, popularized the moe character, especially when it was made to. I mean, I'm also for the freedom of expression, so I'm not. I'm against banning certain manga, uh, as long as it's some publication that the people can choose to purchase or choose to read. That's fine. But in case of the TGT protest, that was the campaign, the public campaign. So there's posters of the girl, supposed to be 15-year-old girl, and okay, that's not real person. It's not threat the real woman, uh, but still, it's endorsed by the city government, and then it's in general. It's just their lack of um, consideration, like how this kind of representation on women uh, affect other people. I think that the public organization like city government has responsibility, and it's okay for if that the private person is in it's reading and enjoying and this kind of manga character. But I think it's different in case of this public representation. And I don't know if well, this particular one was Amasan. It's a Iseshimako or something. Iseshima city that they use the pearl diver moe character. I don't know if that's very empowering for the young woman.
Well, thank you for your insight, Doctor. We do have another question from Paula Ibarra Flores. I think this is quite an interesting question. It says, what is the diversity of feminism in Japan? Is there feminism from ethnic minorities or immigrant Japanese women?
Well, it's very kind of still underdeveloped issue here, because I mean in Japan, several other prime minister in the past said, "Oh yeah, one nation, one race," which is not true at all from the beginning. But I mean, in recent history also, there's the large number of Korean and Chinese immigration. That was some of them are brought in possibly, or because of the result of colonization of Korea. Um, so I know quite few Korean women's organization, and they're very Korean Japanese, Korean in Japan, because they're not Japanese. Um, there's some very strong organization, uh, and also there's recently some a friend of mine, Asako Taki. She's an artist who's been working with immigrant um, community in Tokyo, but still, Japanese government immigration office grant uh, the um, to allow the immigration asylum seekers the the residency status only like less than 10 a year or something. So most of them are just kept in now detention place, and most of them are denied entry. So eventually, after staying in detention camp, which is detention place, which is like prison, they are returned. They are forcibly returned to their country. So Japanese government still try to maintain that image of one nation, one race. So even amongst the feminists, it's still not very visible. And although, as I said, there are some very strong women's organization of Korean residents in Japan, the mainstream feminism has not really, only after I think comfort woman issue came out, the Japanese feminists started to collaborate with the Korean and other immigrant organization. But before, I think the race or diversity was not much of the issue in Japan.
Thank you very much, Doctor. There are several questions we've received regarding. I will read one in specific that I think englobes several of the questions that have been mentioned about feminism in Latin America. This is a question from Santi Tello, who says, "Hello, Yoshiko-san. I would like to know your opinion regarding the current situation on feminism, especially in Latin America."
Well, I in last semester I had a student from Chile, and until then I didn't. I got some information of what's happening in Latin America, like from Monica Meyer and some other feminist artists. But then this student gave the final presentation about the feminism in Latin America, and with lots of video footage and photographs, and then I was really amazed by this action, and also very innovative kind of culture, how they present themselves. It's just so that the dance and the chanting, and it's so powerful, um, compared to in Japan. We still have sort of old-fashioned demonstration procedure, and also for demonstration we have to get the police permission, and then we all kind of obliged, so we only like make like line and can, little chanting, small placard, etc. It's nothing spectacular. But all these Latin American ones, it just looks great and then so appealing, and then also full of like lots of young, also sheer number of participants. I mean, we don't have that number, that people don't come out like that. So I think we have so much to learn from Latin American feminists.
Now that you've mentioned regarding demonstrations in Latin America and demonstration in Japan that are kind of more old-fashioned, I was thinking about whether there is a relation in how both nations have searched to demonstrate through performance, both in Chile, you know, when they did that, and just like you, Ms. Yoshiko-san, with the performance of the statues of comfort women. And I think these ways of demonstrating, as you've said, are very powerful, and we need to continue doing them. We need to continue learning from one another, continue being inspired from one another. And there's another question related to Monica Meyer from America Latias, who says, Monica Meyer is a pioneer in my country for work such as the clothesline. It's actually because of this work that Mexican students started performing clotheslines, demonstrating and denouncing our abusers. How do Japanese authorities work with these sort of issues?
Well, after the Monica's the piece that was well publicized, some organization decided they want to continue doing it in Japan. So, and then Monica gave permission. So actually, there are several of those new clothesline installations started, was done in Japan as well. But still, yeah, we do that. The people are only just starting to come out because, as I said about Me Too movement, until the Shiori's case came out and she so bravely came out, show her face, and then spoke in public, and then appeared in mass media, and as a consequence, she had to leave Japan. But then that sort of started encouraging people to talk about their experience. So it's still, I think, in that beginning stage. We haven't, and then with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's so hard to gather people together. Um, but I think it's starting, but it hasn't come to that big movement yet with number of people participating.
I understand. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I would like to truly thank you, Dr. Shimada. And before we cut the transmission, I wouldn't like to leave without first thank our interpreter, Liz Valiente Moguel, and also thank everyone who connected for their support, for your time. Thank you so much. Remember to please like our video feed on YouTube, on Facebook. And if you're watching YouTube, please ring our bell so that you can receive notifications of upcoming videos. And thank you on behalf of the Satori team. I thank you all for your time, for your support and interest, for joining us in this conference that has been truly special for us. Thank you so, so much, Dr. Shimada. Please don't log off. If you could please join us for a couple of minutes after we finish with this conference. And in the meantime, we'll say goodbye to everyone who's streaming and watching us. Have a good night, have a good afternoon, and once again, thank you.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Okay.